Thanks very much, Tiff, who works in the museum as well, and you'd have seen her kind of helping to handle insects today and things like that. You're in the main lecture theatre in zoology if you haven't been here before. So this is where we have all our big undergraduate lectures. So up until a few weeks ago, this would have been completely full of undergraduate students learning about evolution and behaviour. Now I suspect they're probably all in the pub because they've finished their exams. What I want to try and do, I'm going to have just half an hour. I've tried to make this a talk which is kind of accessible for all different age groups. I'm not sure how well I've done that, but we'll try our best. I wanted, first of all, to welcome you to the Museum of Zoology. Hopefully you've enjoyed being here today. Hopefully you're regular visitors to the museum. If not, please do become so. We're open 6 days a week. We've got an absolutely fantastic collection here. Loads of stuff behind the scenes. There's more tours going on throughout the day where you can actually see some of the collections behind the very little of our collection's actually on display. Most of it's behind the scenes. And it's there to basically provide a record over time so we can find out how the natural world has done 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Our collections go back a long time. So they're really, really important for understanding change. And that's something I'm going to talk about in my talk a little bit today. And of course, that's really pertinent, that thinking about long term, because of course, today we're sharing the event with the Amateur Entomologists Society, which is 90 years old this year. I nearly said today, I don't know if it's today or not, but this year anyway. So again, these kind of organizations are really important in terms of having that longevity, that long engagement with the natural world. And that's why we've got all of this fantastic stuff, all of these amazing specimens in the museum. Is because people have been interested in the natural worlds forever. Maybe it's actually innate in us. Something some people call biophilia hypothesis, this idea that people have that connection with nature. So what I want to try and do in today's talk is I'm going to kind of introduce the insects. I'm going to think a lot about insect conservation, whether insects are doing worse, whether numbers are declining. And I'm also going to think about what we can do about it as budding or established conservation scientists, insect lovers, entomologists, natural historians. I was going to start off by thinking about why insects are important. I mean, I've spent my career so far studying insects. And I think part of the reason for that is because of their extraordinary diversity. The natural world is full of amazing species. I mean, millions and millions of amazing species in the world. Perhaps 8 million kind of complex species share the world with us. That's an extraordinary thing. Only about 2 million of those have been named. So the vast majority of things are still to be described, formally named scientifically. So if you're thinking about going into a career in zoology, in biology, there's still lots and lots to do. Scientists love charts, pie charts. You're going to have a few figures kind of in this talk, which I'll try and talk you through. This is a pie chart from a few years ago, but it's showing the diversity of named life. So things that have been described. And if you unfocus your eyes, hopefully what you can see is that roughly 3/4 of that is in blue. And that's insects or things closely related to insects. So the majority of life on the planet named so far are insects. About 1.4 million named species. Amazingly, about 1 million of those are beetles. So this is not the diversity we might have expected. I do a talk a bit like this for undergraduates in exactly this lecture theatre, and I get them to draw their favourite animal, which is quite interesting. Nearly all of them draw mammals or birds, and quite often it's cats. That's not where diversity of life really is. When I was first starting as a natural historian, I remember someone telling me, if you want to be a good natural historian in the natural world, and you're walking along, this is a good lesson for you, and you see something on the ground, if you kick it and it's hard, or it's a rock, if it's green, it's a plant. If it moves, well, then it's an insect. And you'll be right the vast majority of times if you follow those sort of simple rules. That's just because insects are so diverse. So if you were to do a kind of like a speciescape, draw what the world really looks like, most of it, in terms of species, would be insects. What that means, of course, is when you start working on insects, a lot of the things you find will be new to science. There'll be things that haven't been named before. We've discovered new species from our work, collaborative work in Malaysia and Borneo, things like that. We found a stick insect. I've brought you in a stick insect, which isn't that new now, but it's the best I could do. This was named about 20 years ago. This is the beautiful Peruvian black beauty stick insect. I've got one here. This is one of my pets. You've got more of my pets on display being handled in the whale hall. This one we can't have on display. I'll show you. It's quite beautiful. Whoops. Never work with animals or children. So, see? Now, he's not behaving like a stick insect. Does anyone do audience participation? How is it not behaving like a stick insect? Yes. Very good indeed, exactly. And this one is not behaving like a stick. It's charging around all over my hands. In fact, it's rather hard to control. If it was a bit bigger, it'd also have beautiful red wings, which is what you can see here. They're not for flying, they're just to show off. So what might being red and black mean? Go on, you're really good. Yeah, it can actually produce poison from the back of its neck. And it's really smelly and distasteful. So I handle these ones quite often. So this one's not going to do it. But it's a defense. So this is a species that was only named 20 years ago. It's quite reasonably big. It's about twice the size of that. It's quite charismatic. And it's got all this amazing biology associated with it. And every single species of insect we discover will have something amazing about it like that. So these are really diverse, both in terms of the kind of number of species, but also in terms of what they do. You know, their place in the natural world, all the kind of different stories, evolutionary stories or ecological stories, all of these things about insects are absolutely unique. And that's true of every species that shares the planet with us. The other thing about insects is just their sheer amount. So although they're individually very small, they're not big like a jaguar or a person or a egret or something like that. If you were to scrape them together, though, and measure how much they weighed, what we call biomass, they really punch above their weight in terms of animal mass in a system. This is based on real data. This is a biomass scape based on data where scientists kind of worked out what the mass per hectare, per area, there might be in the Amazon for different groups. We've represented this by the size of the organism. So what you've got here is this kind of like monstrous ant. These are tiny individually, but they're so numerous that if you were to weigh them together, bring them all together, they're much, much bigger than things like mammals represented by that jaguar. Earthworms are pretty important as well, actually. Kind of terrifying earthworm to meet. So these things are important just because of their sheer amount. And of course, that's in terms of what they do. It's also in terms of what eats them. Insects are often the basis of food chains. Loads of birds will eat them, loads of mammals will eat them. All these bigger things that maybe we notice more are reliant on insects. Of course, they're also important just in terms of what they do in terms of ecosystem functions and processes, we call them. So, for example, we've got these beautiful weaver ants on the top here. These are really important predators, very important for pest control in lots of plantations because they'll basically spit out and they'll eat all these caterpillars that are trying to eat crops and apple trees and all sorts of things like that. Beautiful dung beetle on the bottom here, of course. Without these things, we'd be knee-deep in our own poo. You know, these are really, really important for recycling nutrients in ecosystems. You can find lots of dung beetles in the UK as well. Actually, if you go to Cofen, one of our bug hunts this afternoon, lots of fantastic dung beetles you can find there. Of course, they're important for pollination, for plants. I've got a honeybee up the top here, but of course, there's loads of species of pollinators, loads of other bees, all kinds of things, flies, butterflies, moths, which are all contributing to pollination. Without these things, we wouldn't have the flowers and the diversity of plant life, and of course, our food that we rely on. And I've got another one here. I just put this in because one of my favourite. This is a beautiful assassin bug. It's a thing called Cicanus, another predator. And what you've got here, you can see this great big hooked jaw here. It's called an assassin bug because it's thought to have a kind of like almost like an assassin's knife. What it will do is it will stick that mouth part into another insect and it will literally drink it. So nature really is red in tooth and claw. This is the kind of thing, if you're a small insect, you do not want to meet. But really important for pest control. So in plantations I work in Southeast Asia, I'm going to talk about those a bit later, these are really, really important for controlling caterpillars. So insects do everything. They're really diverse. They're really, really important in terms of just the amount of mass. They're really, really important in everything they do. I hope I'm making the pitch that we should all care about insects. And indeed, all the younger and indeed older members of the audience should now change their careers or start their careers studying insects if you've made the mistake of doing anything else up until now. It's never too late. Unfortunately, insects aren't doing very well. This is a study which looked at long-term data sets of insects. This is basically where someone's been collecting insects for decades, or at least I think in this case, actually it was over about 6 years they called a long-term data set. The dots here represent where all these studies came from. This is all the studies people could find with long-term data. And they were looking at not number of species of insect, but weight of insect, the biomass we mentioned before, or abundance. What you can kind of notice is we live in a rather undiscovered world in terms of abundance of insects too. Particularly all the kind of middle bits of the world and the global south has very few data sets. Very few people are studying stuff. So again, if you want to go and study stuff later in your career, there are big gaps in knowledge. For those data we do have, which is lots in Europe around where we are, loads in the UK, got a really good data set. We've got a terrible history of kind of destroying our insects, but we know a lot about it. That's good. Also in the United States, where these data sets dominate, what we've been seeing for things living on land, terrestrial insects, is around about a 9 or 10% drop in insect abundance or biomass per decade. That's absolutely huge in terms of losses. And the reason it's really worrying is because it's hard to do that to insects. These aren't something like a dodo or an elephant or something that's slow reproducing. We can hunt those out easily. Insects are numerous. You know this, they breed fast. I'd have thousands of stick insects if I didn't have to like freeze some of their eggs, actually. You know, they breed quickly. So getting insect numbers going down is really worrying. Flip side is it's not the case for freshwater ones. From these data sets, freshwater insects seem to be doing quite well. So ones on land seem to be doing badly. That's true globally from this study looking everywhere. It's also true in the UK. And again, I mentioned this, we've got a really good long-term data. Lots of people are like in the museum here, but have been going out and measuring numbers of insects for a long time. Probably the biggest one is something called the Butterfly Monitoring Scheme. And this has been going since the 1970s. It's 1976, really long-term data. And what happens here is volunteers. It's not scientists exactly, it's volunteers going out. Some of you may do this, and they'll walk a set route every week from April through to September, and they record the number of butterflies they see. Nice thing about this, of course, is you can only go out when it's sunny and when it's warm. It's really good fun. And you get this amazing data where we know loads about what insects, or what butterflies in this case, have been doing right the way back to the 1970s. Incredible data. And unfortunately, what it turns out is they've not been doing very well. Their numbers have been going down. In particular, we've got maybe 76% of all the different species we get in the UK, which is around about 50, 60 species of butterfly, have declined in abundance or distribution in that time. That's really worrying. There's a hint that things which I've called here specialists, so butterflies which are found in particular environments, only on chalk grasslands, only in ancient woodlands, only in special environments, not in your back garden, basically, have been doing worse. So this is a depressing bit of the talk, because what it suggests is that things aren't going very well. Now, we're unusual in the museum in that we don't just go back to the 1970s, we go back to the 1870s, or even further, actually, about the 1830s. So we can time travel. We can find out how insects were doing 200 years ago. We've been doing some work in the museum to just do just that. And what we can do is we can look at things like this. This is a tray of insects. I have to be really careful not to drop this in front of the audience. It'd be tragic, wouldn't it? This is a tray of insects, butterflies. These are UK butterflies from our collection here. And if you've got really eagle eyes, can you see anything underneath the butterflies? Like a little bit of paper in there? You can see, that one's probably hard to see actually. The one up there is quite good. Every single one has got a little slip of paper on it. You can just about see. You sometimes can read the names and the labels, but all of them will have a location, they'll have a date, they'll have who collected it. What that means is if you can get all that information off them, most of them will, then you can begin to work out how things have done since the records began. And we've started to do lots of work with, particularly with Matt Hayes, and I'm going to mention Tiff in a sec, who introduced me, has been doing this for moths as well. We've got a data set now, we've got enough where we can actually begin to kind of look at that in more detail and see how things have done over time, which is really, really interesting. It takes an enormous amount of work, as you can perhaps imagine. One of the things we can also use is not just the labels on these specimens, we've also got fantastic diaries and notebooks dating back to that time. So people who are really enthusiastic of butterflies in the 1830s or 1850s, people like this is a guy called Leonard Jennings, who was a kind of a friend of Charles Darwin. He lived in Cambridge between the 1830s and 1850s. So kind of, 90 plus years, 190 years ago. And he recorded basically how common things were in the country in that time. It's really amazing data. What he writes is already worrying just for individual species. So we have things like this. This is a swallowtail butterfly at the top. If you go on one of the museum tours, you'll see these specimens, by the way. This is now restricted to one place in the UK, Norfolk Broads. But Jennings writes, found in the greatest plenty throughout the fens between Ely and Cambridge. You'd have seen swallowtail butterflies outside the window. That's not that long ago. This one at the bottom here, large copper butterfly. Not uncommon in Cambridgeshire, extinct in the country now. These are things which have changed really fast. And one of the reasons that museums like this are important is because it stops people forgetting that. It's really important. If you can point to this, people will believe you. Perhaps even politicians, even policymakers. We can look at this quantitatively as well. I promise I haven't got too many graphs in my thing, but scientists on the whole love graphs. So I'm going to put some figures in. This is looking at some part of our data here. What we're looking at here is the number of specialists, which is in blue. So I've used the same color. Specialist butterflies, if you remember, things found in restricted areas. And then generalist butterflies, things found in your back garden, in red. We're looking at the proportions in our collection before the First World War, so pre-1914, between the wars, 14 to 1939, and then after that. The reason I've divided it up by the wars is just because these mark real changes in the environment. So they're quite a good place to do a line. As it happens, we have almost equal numbers of specimens in these 3 time periods as well, which is quite helpful. What you can see, hopefully, if you unfocus your eyes, is in our collection, the proportion of specialists has been going down over time. That's exactly the same results as we got for those modern records from butterfly transects. So really, really special things have been disappearing. And it's not just since the 1970s, which is still quite a long time ago. It's since the 1870s. So we need to care about this. We also need to be much more ambitious in terms of what we're doing and how we extract data from these different specimens, how we can kind of inform policy. I just put this in to embarrass Tiff mostly. This is a fantastic new project that Tiff has been leading on, trying to get not just kind of data on the where things were, but actually data on the morphology, we say, the kind of way things look, the sizes. One of the things Tiff has been doing is pioneering lots of this work. We've got this kind of new automated imaging thing that Tiff's setting up. We'll basically be able to scan our specimens and be able to work out how they're changing in wing size, whether they're evolving over time. We've also got an ambitious plan to make super-size insects. So maybe if you come back to one of these Zoology Live events in a few years' time, a couple of years' time, we'll be able to present you with a kind of bird-sized moth, perfectly scanned from our collection. This means we can detect how things are responding to the natural world, not just in terms of where they are, but in what they look like. That's really important as well, because species can change. In the sort of second bit of my talk, I wanted to think a little bit about why this might be. What is it about changes which are causing, or things that people are doing which are changing the natural world? Number one thing up until now has been habitat change. If you're in the tropics, where I work for some of our work in Southeast Asia, it's about forests being cut down and converted to agriculture, primary change. If we're in our part of the world, it's about agriculture becoming more intense. That's changed beyond recognition in the last 50 years in both of these places. This is shown here for us as another figure, but this is based on real data. This is a rainforest in Southeast Asia. This is an oil palm plantation, agricultural landscape. And hopefully you can see, look at the scale here, it's going up to meters. We've got tropical trees here that are 80 meters tall. Tallest tropical forest in the world. If you imagine at school running 100 meters, if people still do that at school, then this is huge. These are massive trees. And suddenly you're getting converted to agriculture, where at most we're getting kind of 12 meters. This is still quite complex agriculture, but it's not a tropical rainforest anymore. Loads of things will be lost. And of course, worldwide, we've also got this. You won't have escaped a graph like this at some point, even our younger audiences. This is climate change. This is looking at mean temperatures, average temperatures worldwide over time, and they're going up and up. And it basically tracks with human emissions of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. The world's getting hotter. Habitats are changing, the world's getting hotter, and these two things, which affect insects a lot, are combined. This is some data we collected a few years ago from those same forests, actually, in Malaysia. What we did was we put out loads of these. They look like watch batteries, but actually they're little tiny computers called data loggers. And all of these will record temperature and humidity for us every 4 hours. It's really easy. You don't have to kind of collect your own data anymore at all. You just put these out and then you download them. And these are the data we got. Again, apologies for the graph, but it's much more simple than you might think. What we've got on the bottom axis here is time of day, so going through the day. What we've got on the side axis is temperature, either in the air or in the ground. And then here is humidity, how wet the air is. And hopefully what you can see is it gets hotter during the day and cooler at nighttime. It's good. So the data loggers are definitely working. And it gets drier during the day and wetter during the nighttime. Again, that makes sense. But look at the difference between the bars. So what we've got is the grey bar is an oil palm plantation. It's an agricultural, it's a farmland habitat. The coloured bars are forest. So what you've got here in the heat of the day, on this one here, let's have a pointer somewhere here. Heat of the day, you've got this huge spike in temperature. This difference in the middle of the day, about 1 to 2 o'clock, it's kind of 5 or 6 degrees hotter in a farm than it is in a forest. bigger change than you'll get from climate change globally over the next 100 years. That makes a real difference for insects because very often insects find it really hard to cope with high temperatures. They're little things. They respond to the environment. If it heats up, they get hotter. If it gets too hot, they won't survive. So these things matter. We've been doing some work on this for different species of butterflies. So what we do is we'll kind of work. I'm going to take you from tropical Malaysia to equally tropical Bedfordshire. Yeah, seamless link. And what we've been doing is looking at lots of these beautiful UK butterflies in the fields. And what we basically do is we'll go out, we'll survey reserves, really beautiful grassland reserves where lots of the British butterfly species are found. And we'll use this, which is a temperature logger. Again, if I'm doing a lot, I'm going to use one of your hands. One of you can put your hand out. This won't hurt too much. And it's a bit. So hopefully I'm going to get you to read if that's all right. So can you read what the air temperature is? 26.3 degrees. Let's see if I touch the end of this. Go, keep on going up actually for a sec. Unless I've broken the kit. That has happened.
33. 34 is going up.
It's a hot day.
34.3.
34.3. So this is telling you that you're alive. So that's good news. But what this is basically doing is it's recording temperature in a very fine way at the end of this probe. What we can do is we can catch butterflies in the field and we can record their temperature. And we can do that, it's what's shown here, for a whole variety of air temperatures. This is the air temperature. This is the butterfly temperature. This is what would happen if the butterfly was exactly the same as the air temperature. What you can see is that's not the case. When it's colder, they're hotter. When it's hotter, they're colder. They can control their temperature, same way as we do. But they do it in a different way. They'll seek out areas which are cooler when it's hotter. They'll seek out areas where it's hotter when it's cooler. And they'll also sunbathe if they want to. And it turns out some things, like this large white, are really, really good at controlling their temperature. Other specialist species, rare species, are actually really bad at it. This is something called the Duca burgundy butterfly. And this is one of my favourite butterflies in the UK, and it's awful at controlling its temperature. As it gets hotter, it gets even more hot. One of the things we've been doing is trying to work out why that is. Why are some butterflies really good at controlling temperature, escaping the heat, and others aren't? And it turns out often it's to do with wing colour, wing size, but also family, what group of butterflies they belong to. Now, since we've been sitting here, I've been doing an experiment, but I've no idea if it's going to work or not. We'll see. Because I've got a heat lamp here, which I've stolen from my pet tortoise. And I've got two butterflies, one which has got pale wings, and one which has got dark wings. This is a butterfly called the large white, which is the one we saw before, which is able to control its temperature very well. This one can't. And I was wondering if I move this down, you've been answering questions fantastically. Would you like to take part in the experiment? Can I ask you to stand up? A bit round of applause, please, for taking part. You come round. I'm going to put them here. They've been under my heat lamp. And what I would like you to do, if you hold that, I'm going to very gently touch on. Can you read that numbers okay? Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch onto the body of the large white first of all. This is the pale butterfly. It's a science in action here. It's exciting, isn't it? What temperature is it? Can you read?
27.2.
27.2 degrees. And then on to the peacock butterfly here.
27.
Sorry.
What?
28 now.
28.4.
28.45. So that's quite good, actually. So it's a whole degree hotter. So it's been exactly the same conditions. Thank you very much. So what that's shown is that butterfly, what's the difference between them, actually? Can you tell me?
That one's hotter and that one's...
It is? Definitely. So you've got everything. But yeah, you're right. So that one's much cooler and it's much paler. This one's much hotter and it's much darker. So what's probably been happening here is this one's been reflecting the light. Right? So thank you very much indeed. Amazingly, it worked. Put another round of applause. Thank you very much for doing that. So things like the characteristics of species can influence how they're impacted by climate change, which is really, really important. And that's one of the things we've been interested in because that prediction means you can then begin to target conservation and you can begin to think what you can actually do about it. It's really, really important. And I wanted to finish off. I don't want you to kind of go away feeling depressed about kind of all the state of the natural world. There's loads of things which can be done to reduce these impacts. I'm going to go through some of those now. Some things which we've been involved with partner organisations, other which are just general approaches. And I thought it'd just be kind of interesting to itemise those because there's loads and loads of things, of course, you can do. One is really, really important, is just to make things more joined up. In places like the UK and England particularly, habitats which are good for specialist butterflies, for specialist species, are really, really fragmented. They're little patches in small areas and they're not joined up. That can change. And it really is changing in the UK. There's some amazing restoration projects now. This is one from exactly where we collected that data. If you can see here, when I first started, this shows my age, doesn't it? When I first started working on these sites back in 2006, a million years ago, what they had there were these two reserves in blue. They were isolated. They were both really nice, but they had farmland in between. What happened over time was the extra blue bits and then the pale pink bits here. Reserves got joined up. Local people actually clubbed together and they bought land and they made that reserve, which is managed by the Wildlife Trust, twice the size. That now makes it much easier to manage for wildlife. And that's happening all over the country. It also means that if temperature changes, these things have got somewhere to go. They can move. It's really, really important. Of course, there's restoration projects on a scale that wouldn't have been imaginable when I first started my career. Things like the fantastic Great Fen Project. Enormous restoration of agricultural landscapes, really, really important for wildlife, which is going on just north of here. These are things which would never have happened before. This last year was the first time that two nature reserves called Holme Fen and Wood Walton Fen, really important wetland habitats, were linked together by wildlife conservation for the first time in 150 years. This is really impressive. When I first started working for the Wildlife Trust, which I did just after I finished here in zoology years ago, we thought it would maybe take 50 years or 100 years for that to happen. It's happened in 20. And that's because people care. That's really, really important. You can also start thinking about wildlife, not just in reserves, but in the rest of the countryside. We don't want to live in a world where you don't see wildlife unless you're on a reserve, right? I want to see swallowtail butterflies outside the window again. One of the things that you can do to do that is to try and bring wildlife into human environments. That could be your garden, it could be the town centre, it could be agricultural landscapes. So I'm back to oil palm plantations in Southeast Asia again. And one of the projects we've been working on for about the last 10, 15 years is something called the BEFTA project. What we've been doing is working in Sumatra with oil palm companies, with agricultural companies, farmers. And we've been advising them to change their management, getting them to change how they manage their farmland habitats. We've set an experiment to do it. I'm going to talk you through this really, really quickly. But this is an experiment where we got them to change how they manage the understory, the plants growing on the floor in between all of those oil palms. Normally what farmers will do is they'll spray with herbicides. They'll get rid of lots of these plants that grow in amongst the other plants. In the company we work with, they did that a little bit, but not too much. So we set up big plots, 150 metre by 150 plots. And normally what they do in these plantations is they spray around the palms. So what it looks like. It looks a bit like coconut palms, really, but all together. And they let the rest grow. And what we did was we measured that in lots of plots for a year. And then we got them to change it. We got some plots where we stopped them spraying, we called enhanced plots. Other plots where we kept the business as usual, same management. And other plots where we said, okay, spray as much as you want. This is what lots of plantations do. And we could then look at the effects on diversity. We could look at the effects of insects. I'm not going to give you many results, but one of the things we found was that you could reduce spraying, you could still make these plots really, really productive. But what you could find is actually far more insects. This is really nice data from Andreas Avento there and Jake Stone. And what they're looking at are these assassin bugs, which I mentioned before, my favourites. Two different species. These are horrible plots, don't worry about the details. But the different colours here basically represent those three different treatments. This is before we change anything, this is afterwards. And look at the difference here. Where you reduce, that's the red, all of the assassin bugs disappear. Where you allow the understory to be there, their numbers go up. This is really interesting for the plantations because these control pests. So we want these in the landscape. They're really, really important. Not just that, the plantations we were working with are actually breeding these in the lab to release them. It turns out all they needed to do was just stop spraying. So these things can really work. You can get this kind of win-win situation. I'm running a bit out of time. We found the same sort of things for some really impressive spiders as well. But I'll come back on that. I know spiders aren't everyone's favourite and they're not insects either, so I'll cut out that bit. Another thing you can begin to do is understand exactly what species need in the landscape as well. That's kind of partly true with the butterflies, understanding whether they can control their temperature or not. That tells you a lot about how you can go about helping them. Another thing you can do is find out exactly where they're found on reserves, what habitats they need to survive. And we've done this for the Duke of Burgundy. This is the butterfly I mentioned before, the one that's really bad at controlling its temperature. We did this for this reserve we've been working on for ages called Tottenham Quarry. One of the things we did was we literally followed this whole reserve for 15 years. We mapped out every butterfly we could find, both adults and caterpillars. And we linked that to the environment. That's the map at the top here. What kind of vegetation, what slope, what aspect, everything about the environment in these areas. And what we found was, even though this habitat's really famous for this butterfly, when people actually travel all over the country to see it here, it turns out they're not found on all the reserve. Actually, they've got hotspots. This is work from Matt Hayes, actually. You can go and is kind of here today. They've got hotspots where they're only found in these areas. They've got really particular requirements. And that's useful because if you know those requirements, well, then you can manage for it. You can increase their numbers. And it means you don't have to manage the whole reserve for them either. There's certain areas which are really important. Things like that can make quite a big difference to making conservation easier, more tractable. The other thing we've started to think about doing is actually managing the environment to even cope with the impacts of climate change. This is a really fun project. We often do big experiments in our group. And this is one we've been working with the Wildlife Trust, where we've been putting kind of topography, slopes, butterfly banks in new areas of the reserve. So I mentioned the reserve that increased in size. This is a photo of it at the top here. And the way it's increased in size is it's taken over a bit of an kind of arable field, a wheat field next door, completely flat. And so what we did was work with the Wildlife Trust here to put in banks. They're E-shaped banks. There's a reason for that. Partly it's because my name's Ed. So that's very important. E-shaped banks for Ed. But also what it means is we've got them in different slopes and different aspects. Some are facing north, some east, some south, some west. The prongs make it sheltered or not. So what we're doing actually is controlling the microclimate. And one of the things we're thinking here is that by making this more varied habitat, cooler conditions perhaps when it's hot, we can help butterflies and other insects cope with the effects of climate change. Amazingly, just after we'd set up these banks, we got a few years ago that real heat wave, like now, but even worse. Remember we got up to 40 degrees the first time in the UK? And that happened the season we put in the banks. This is, again, beautiful work from our team here, but particularly kind of Matt Hayes again and Andrew Bladen on the top here, who did a lot of this work. What we did on the hot day was we got told we really should try and limit going outside for health and safety reasons. So we went outside and we did a butterfly survey. And what we found was that in the heat of the day, the only place we could find the butterflies, the hot days are in deep red here, are in the shade or the shelter of our banks. It was really weird. The first time I've ever seen it. We got tens of butterflies all clustered in just a small area using these artificial banks we put in. These kind of things can make a real difference to insects. And of course, that's on a big scale. That's on a reserve. Not everyone can kind of do that on their own back garden. But of course, you can do lots of stuff on your back garden as well. There's loads of things. Because insects are small, because they're numerous, because they're everywhere, you can manage your back garden for wildlife. You can make it long grass areas. This is my back garden. I call this wildlife gardening. It's not the whole lot, actually. I've got neater bits as well. But this makes a big difference. And of course, if people start getting more involved with nature, well, then they can also start helping with its monitoring. They can do their own butterfly transects. There's all kinds of ways anyone can get involved with monitoring. And that's really important because it increases awareness of insects. It also breaks down that barrier again. And it means people are aware of insect conservation. This is absolutely key. Conservation can't just be done with biology in mind. It has to be people. Everyone has to be involved. And of course, I'm going to finish off events like this, the wonderful work of the AES. This is the way that people first get involved. Without this, we've got no chance. With this, I'm very hopeful about the future. It's really, really important. I've put this up just to illustrate the kind of range of events that go on in the museum here, and obviously with the fantastic Bug Club and all the work of the AES as well for the last 90 years. But this kind of thing makes a big difference. It's not just about kind of involving individual people. It's got ripple effects. Kind of actually involving the natural world means that people will then go on to study this in their career, to work for the Wildlife Trust or for conservation organisations, to carry out primary research, whatever it is. These are things that really change the world. I've put up some photos of kind of kids looking for bugs here. You'll probably notice this. I've not changed a bit. This is me, about 9 years old, I think. It's not actually an insect. It's actually a wrasse, a fish, which I've caught. But this is kind of indicative. These kind of experiences are absolutely key, whether you're a child or whether you're an adult, in whether you care about the natural world, whether you do something about it. So hopefully I've slightly overrun, and I'm sorry about that, but only a little bit. And what I've tried to do is give you a whistle-stop tour of why I think insects are important and interesting, why they're doing badly, and they are doing bad at the moment, but then what we can do about it. There's no shortage of kind of opportunities to do that. And I'm very hopeful that kind of as the next decade goes on, things will be getting better because people are more involved. I've kind of briefly got loads of people who've helped with all the different projects. And of course, thank you very much indeed for listening. Thank you. I think there is, yeah, do you want to do, there is time for questions.